I recently decided to file for divorce. I've chosen to keep the house and the car. I understand this is a tough time, and though my words may sound sympathetic, they carry a sharper edge than intended. The smile that accompanied these words inflicted deeper pain than I could have imagined. How could he decide to leave at a time when I was battling illness? Didn't we vow to face life's challenges together? The shock of his cold demeanor and harsh words leaves me in tears. I am unable to forgive him. Despite my physical frailty, I am resolved to make him feel the pain he has inflicted upon me. This resolve marks the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one of retribution. My name is Natalie, and at 42 years old, I have devoted my life to being a loving housewife, caring tirelessly for my family. Each day with my husband Bruce used to be filled with joy, reminiscent of the sweet, vibrant candies we once enjoyed together, so delightful that time seemed to vanish. When we first met through a mutual friend, Bruce's outgoing nature and warm smile quickly put me at ease, making it easy to open up to him. Our early days were filled with such happiness that I eagerly looked forward to every moment we could spend together, cherishing each one. It's difficult to grasp now, but our love was once deep and true, filled with promises of a shared future. Living with him felt like a dream. Each day was radiant, and I believed our smiles would last forever. However, as time passed, Bruce began to change, likely strained by his demanding job. His salary wasn't substantial, as he hadn't pursued advanced education or qualifications, which limited his career opportunities. Although I suggested he consider a new job several times, he always hesitated, claiming he was content with his current situation. While I was working full-time and we weren't facing any financial issues, I still had concerns about what might happen if we decided to have a child or if I became ill and couldn't work. To ease these worries, I thought it might help if Bruce found a stable job as well. One day, a friend from my company's HR department mentioned there was an opening in administration. It didn't require special qualifications, just a basic skill set, and it seemed like a perfect chance for Bruce to improve his job situation, which I knew he found challenging. Excited, I suggested the position to him, thinking it could be a great opportunity. However, Bruce's response was unexpectedly cold and defensive. "Why are you making decisions about my job without asking me? I chose my current place myself. Are you saying there's something wrong with it?" His reaction caught me off guard. I had only suggested out of concern for his future and well-being, not to undermine his choices. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you with my proposal," I apologized, trying to explain my intentions. "I just thought the conditions at your current job seemed tough, and maybe this company would be a better fit for you." But he didn't see it that way. "Just because you're my wife doesn't mean you can interfere in my career decisions," he retorted, almost as if he were talking to a stranger, not his partner. As he walked away, his words, "as if you were a stranger," echoed in my mind, striking a deep chord. I am his wife, and we are supposed to be a family, yet his words and demeanor felt like they were directed at someone else. This incident was just one of many that began to create a growing rift between us. This strain extended to his interactions with my family as well. My mother, a genuinely kind soul, often visited our home while I was at work. She would clean and cook, leaving delightful meals in the refrigerator as her way of looking after us. I deeply appreciated her efforts and frequently invited her over for dinner. However, lately, Bruce had become visibly annoyed by her presence. On occasions when he'd come home and find her in the living room, his irritation was palpable, further widening the growing crack between us. Bruce's abrupt comment, "You're here again?" left both my mother and me stunned. It made me question the state of our relationship and our future together. How were we supposed to bridge the growing gap between us? With a gentle smile, my mother responded, "It's all right, Natalie. If my presence makes you uncomfortable, I apologize. I'll leave earlier today." Hearing her say that broke my heart, especially knowing how she always went out of her way to help us despite her busy schedule. "Bruce, please think about how Mom feels," I implored, tears beginning to well up in my eyes, altering the mood in the room. I remembered all the times she had brightened our home and couldn't fathom why Bruce would address her in such a manner. Bruce tried to explain his feelings, saying, "When I come home after working hard all day, all I want is to relax. It's exhausting to have someone else around all the time in my own house." I tried to see things from Bruce's perspective, but my appreciation for my mother's efforts made it difficult. It seemed to me that Bruce was just being stubborn, and I struggled to find a way to communicate my feelings in a manner he could understand. My mother, seeing the tension, reassured me, "Don't worry about it, Natalie. If everyone's happy, that's all that matters to me." Her comforting smile filled me with an overwhelming sense of guilt. That evening, as I savored the delicious meal she had prepared, my emotions were a mix of appreciation and remorse. I couldn't stop thinking about Bruce and how our relationship might be mended. Meanwhile, a new challenge emerged. One day at work, I suddenly felt dizzy and fainted. Thankfully, my colleagues acted swiftly, calling an ambulance and rushing me to the nearby hospital, where a series of medical tests began. Everything felt like a blur as my health took a sudden turn for the worse. I tried reaching out to Bruce, but he didn't respond. Then came the heavy diagnosis: cancer. Thankfully, it was caught early, and the doctors assured me that with the right treatment, I would recover. However, I was well aware of the grueling nature of cancer treatments and braced myself for a challenging journey ahead. I informed Bruce about my diagnosis and subsequent hospitalization, but his reaction was dishearteningly indifferent. His silence during this critical time made me feel incredibly isolated. Nonetheless, I resolved to focus on my treatment, believing that pushing forward was my only viable option. The treatment was even tougher than I had anticipated. My health rapidly declined, confining me to my hospital bed most of the time. Amidst this struggle, Bruce finally appeared in my hospital room one day. "How are you feeling?" he asked nonchalantly. "It's pretty rough," I replied, trying to inject some lightheartedness into the conversation. "It might have been a bit easier if you were by my side." Honestly, I was frustrated by his lack of presence. Why hadn't he come sooner? His support could have made a significant difference during these trying times. Instead of feeling relieved at our reunion, I felt even more isolated. Reflecting on our past only increased my irritation. Then, Bruce dropped a bombshell that left me genuinely stunned. "I filed for divorce. I'll take the house and the car. I know it's tough, but hang in there. I don't know how much time you have left, but I hope you keep fighting." "Wait, are you serious?" I exclaimed, unable to hide my shock. "Divorce?" A storm of questions raged within me. Didn't we promise to always stay together? I had always believed that true couples would face challenges together. Bruce's words confused me and left me feeling completely detached. At that moment, a quiet resolve formed within me. "I don't need him anymore," I whispered to myself. "I'll move forward on my own. I'll just forget about him." I decided there and then that he would one day regret underestimating my strength and resilience, but first I needed to end our relationship properly. "I get it. I'm sorry for everything. Keep the house, keep the car," I said, relinquishing all ties with a sense of finality, ready to face the next chapter of my life on my terms. "Whatever you want, if you need compensation money, I'll pay," I said with resignation. Bruce initially looked surprised, but quickly his expression turned into a smug smile. "I didn't expect you to accept it so easily. I thought you'd throw a tantrum. Anyway, take care of yourself and don't bother inviting me to your funeral," he remarked coldly as he left the room. As he walked away, a smile spread across my face. He didn't realize that he had just fallen into my carefully laid trap. It was going to be interesting to see how his life would unfold from here. I reached out to a colleague from a company I knew well. "Hello, long time no talk. I have a favor to ask. Can you help?" Initially surprised, my colleague hesitated, but after I explained the situation, he agreed. "All right, let's give it a try." Everything was set. I imagined Bruce's shocked and anxious face, and this vision brought a smirk to my face. This newfound sense of excitement even boosted my motivation to continue my medical treatments with renewed vigor. A few days passed, and one afternoon, after my treatment session, I noticed that my cell phone had received 102 missed calls from Bruce. The thrill of waiting for his call was oddly satisfying. Once I calmed down, I called him back, and his shaky voice greeted me. "Natalie, help me." "I never expected this," he pleaded. Hearing his distressed tone made me chuckle internally. This was exactly what I had planned. Trying to sound concerned, I asked, "Bruce, tell me what happened." He took a deep breath before replying, "My name's on the company's layoff list." I can't believe this is happening. As I listened to his panicked voice, I smirked, knowing that everything was unfolding just as I had orchestrated. The person I contacted was the head of sales at our company. I had asked him to reconsider the business dealings with Bruce's company. Initially puzzled, he reviewed their transaction history and decided it was best to switch to a different partner. That's why Bruce's company started calling me. Deciding to twist the knife a bit, I revealed something I had kept to myself. "You know, there are rumors in your company about you and the new girl. Everyone likes her," I said, dropping the hint with feigned nonchalance. This added layer was sure to unsettle him even more as my plan continued to unravel perfectly. "Because she's always so cheerful, there are whispers about an affair. Is that true?" I could hear disbelief in Bruce's voice. "Are you serious? You can't be serious. This has to be a joke." His surprise was understandable. After all, who would think an ordinary employee could wield such influence? "Well, actually," I continued, letting a pause hang to gauge his reaction, "I'm the CEO of this company." Silence fell on the other end of the line as Bruce tried to process the revelation. "It's no lie," I assured him. This was the reason we had been living so comfortably. "My annual income is around $5 million. Your regular salary wouldn't have been enough to support your lavish shopping habits." The truth was, Bruce's spending was exorbitant. The $2,500 monthly allowance he received from me functioned like a second salary, yet it was never enough for him. He'd often rush to me with a pleading tone, asking, "Can I have a little more?" At this rate, the money he received from me might end up surpassing his actual salary. While most people would scale back to a more sustainable lifestyle, since I earned $5 million a year, giving Bruce a $2,500 allowance each month wasn't a big deal to me. However, I always wondered what he spent that money on. "Bruce, yesterday was payday, wasn't it?" I asked him, reminding him of our routine. "I've always given you extra money on payday, but that might be difficult from now on. We're not a couple anymore, and it's only natural that you can't expect that monthly allowance." I then cautioned him about the mortgage on the house. "Oh, and be careful with the mortgage. It's $3,800 a month. I know it'll be tough, but you'll need to manage it well. If you're late with the payment, you might have to leave the house." While a $3,800 loan wasn't a burden for me, it was a significant amount for Bruce. From his reaction, it was clear he was both confused and in disbelief, repeatedly muttering, "Really? Can this be happening?" His sense of security was visibly shaken, reflecting his newfound vulnerability. "And that's crazy. What I said was the truth. This is the result of my efforts to maintain our relationship," I expressed, reflecting on how Bruce took advantage of my presence, pursuing only his desires. Perhaps it was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. Why did it come to this? I've been laid off and now have to figure out how to get by. How am I going to pay the rent this month? The despair in his voice was palpable. He sounded lost and uncertain about his future. In his position, imagining a brighter future seemed daunting. I understood that Bruce's situation was overwhelming and confusing, a direct result of his past actions and disrespectful behavior towards me and my family. If he had shown genuine care and respect, things might not have deteriorated to this point. This was the consequence of his choices. Bruce remained silent, perhaps at a loss for words. I felt a mix of pity and amusement at his predicament. Was this the end of our conversation? Could I hang up now? But just then, he spoke again, his voice tinged with panic. Wait, can we reconsider our relationship one more time? I know it sounds selfish, but I realize now how important you were to me. The idea of starting over with him made my heart race, not out of excitement, but due to the daunting prospect of revisiting all the pain he had caused. He continued, I know I've been reckless lately, and I'm sorry I couldn't visit you in the hospital more often, but once you're better, let's go somewhere peaceful and have a relaxing time together. I want to see your smile again. His words were nostalgic, reminiscent of the promises he made when he proposed, a life filled with laughter and happiness. Back then, I was so swept up by his charm that I jumped into the relationship without fully considering the consequences. Now, reflecting on married life and all that had transpired, the thought of returning to how things were seemed overwhelmingly complex and fraught with potential pain. It proved challenging to navigate our relationship, especially with Bruce's reckless spending habits. Maybe if I had understood him better, things might have turned out differently. His voice grew weaker as he pleaded, Natalie, I can't live without you. I want to be by your side and face life's challenges together. Can we start fresh, just one more time? His words were saturated with sadness and a hint of desperation. Despite the emotion, trusting him again was difficult after everything that had happened. Stop it already, we're done. I've chosen a new path and I can't go back, I responded firmly. There was a trace of sorrow in his voice, and I could sense he genuinely wanted to reconcile. Please, let me say one last thing. I truly loved you, Natalie. If you ever change your mind, I'll be here. His words might have swayed me once, but I had already made a firm decision about my future and our relationship. I would no longer be influenced by his sweet talk. Enough. Words like that won't change my mind. Think about it. Don't you have another girlfriend? Shouldn't you focus on her? I was aware of Bruce's new relationship through information provided by his boss. His declarations of love now seemed hollow, mere conveniences to sway me back to his side. It was frustrating to realize that he only reached out when he needed something and turned away when times were tough. We can't be together anymore. Spend quality time with her and forget about me. I will not be reaching out, but if you need to contact me, speak to my lawyer. Take care of yourself, Bruce. His pleas seemed sincere, but letting him go was necessary. It would likely make his life more difficult, but that was a consequence of his choices. I had my own life to move forward with, and I wanted him to stand on his own 3 feet. After our conversation, I hung up and adjusted my settings to block any further contact from him. According to my lawyer, Bruce repeatedly tried to reach out, but I remained firm in my decision to move on independently. My decision was resolute, and my lawyer respected it, keeping details about me confidential. Surprisingly, my lawyer then suggested pursuing damages, a possibility I hadn't initially considered, but now seemed like a viable way to seek compensation. I knew Bruce and his new partner were not financially well off. Rumors of his serious debts had circulated for a while. Upon further investigation into his affair partner, I discovered she had fled due to her financial predicaments. When I reached out to her family, they were furious and disclosed that she was now back home, working hard to make ends meet. It was clear that actions always have consequences, and they were now experiencing their own. Meanwhile, I had managed to overcome cancer and make a full recovery, a development that even surprised my doctors. On returning to the office, I found a letter on my desk from the supportive sales manager. His heartwarming words deeply touched me. As word got out that I was single again, some colleagues kindly offered to set me up. However, after everything that had happened in my past marriage, I decided to cherish my time and focus on myself for now. This period of reflection and self-care seemed essential after the tumultuous events I had endured.
From today, you're the newcomer in our house, my mother-in-law declared, fixing me with a piercing look. You're at the very bottom of the hierarchy and responsible for all the household chores. Is that clear? She added, her tone unyielding. Huh? Oh, all of them? I stammered, struggling to process her words. Can't you understand simple instructions the first time? She snapped sharply. You must have a poor memory. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I murmured, my voice trembling. Desperately, I glanced at my husband for support, but he avoided my gaze. It was as if none of this concerned him. This wasn't the life he had promised me, but something awaited me ahead. Something that would change everything. My name is Aubrey. As I turned 30 a few years ago, my parents started pressuring me to get married more often. At the time, I attended a home party that I was invited to by a friend. There, I met a man and unexpectedly hit it off with him. We started dating soon after, and after a year and a half, we got married. Back then, I didn't give much thought to marriage. In retrospect, that was my downfall. I was in a hurry, driven by the sole desire to reassure my parents. My overly anxious mother would call me almost every week, worried that I would remain single for the rest of my life. So when I announced that I had decided to get married, she cried tears of joy. My husband, Hector, was an average person in both good and bad ways, and we naturally got along well. We hardly ever fought, so when he proposed, I accepted immediately. One day after our marriage was set, while we were having a meal at a restaurant, Hector brought up the following. Actually, I'm a little worried about my parents being the eldest son. I'd like to live with them if possible. Huh? You mean living together? I asked, taken aback by his sudden revelation. He nodded. Yes, I think it's important to be there for them. I was somewhat impressed that Hector, who hadn't talked much about his family until then, had been thinking about his future in-laws to that extent. Living with your spouse's family after marriage is a common thing, or so I thought. With that kind of image in mind, I casually agreed to my husband's proposal. From the day we registered our marriage, we started living in my husband's parents' house. On the day of cohabitation, I headed to my husband's family home with him. Of course, I had met his parents on the occasion of our marriage greetings and the meeting of both families, but living together was still nerve-wracking. During this time, I had been naive in my thinking. Even though we were living together, I didn't expect any dramatic hospitality like in dramas, and I thought household chores would be properly divided among everyone. I was carelessly thinking about such things. Besides, my husband's sister also lived in his parents' house, and I even thought it would be easier having someone of the same age around. However, my thinking was quickly shattered. When I arrived at my in-laws' house, I said, I'm counting on you from today. My mother-in-law looked down at me at the entrance and said, From today, you're the newcomer in our house. You're at the bottom of the hierarchy and responsible for all the household chores. Understood? Huh? Oh, all of them, I stammered, suddenly overwhelmed. Can't you comprehend what you're told in one go? She snapped, then added, You have a poor memory, don't you? What kind of education did your parents give you? Oh yes, I'm sorry, I apologized quickly. In a panic, I looked at my husband, but he casually averted his gaze. He had told me before we got married, even if we live together, my parents are still healthy, so you don't have to worry too much about household matters. This was absurd. When I went back to the room to put down my luggage, I asked my husband about it. Hey, what's going on? I was told to do all the household chores by myself. You said I didn't have to worry about household matters, right? I exclaimed indignantly. Huh? Did I say something like that? He replied, pretending to be confused. What? You definitely said that, I insisted. As the eldest son's wife, it's only natural for you to take care of the household chores, he said dismissively. We're being allowed to live here, so don't complain. To my surprise, my husband was playing dumb. He wasn't on my side. He had no intention of helping me. I realized it immediately. From that day on, my hellish cohabitation life began. From morning till night, whenever I was at home, I was constantly made to do household chores. I was fortunate enough to be working and didn't have to be at home on weekdays during the day. But on weekday mornings, evenings, and weekends, I was always at the mercy of my in-laws' demands. No matter how much I did, they would complain. Can't you see that there's still dust left? My mother-in-law would yell at me. One morning, I tried to take a bath early because I had to do chores, but my mother-in-law stopped me. "As a newcomer, it's common sense for you to be the last one to take a bath," she scolded. There were even days when I couldn't take a bath until past midnight. Those days were incredibly tough. Not only did my in-laws never help with the household chores, but my husband didn't either, and yet, they would all join together to complain to me. It was impossible for me to handle all the household chores in a single house perfectly. But if I said even a single word of defiance, it would be over. It would come back to me multiplied many times over. I was entrusted with all the household chores, and no matter how hard I tried, there would always be some complaint. Every day I was exhausted from lack of sleep, pushing to my limits. My sister-in-law, who I thought was my only salvation, turned out to be no different from the rest of my in-laws. "Since you've become part of the family, it's only natural for you to listen to what your sister says," she said, then casually stole my personal belongings. It became a daily occurrence. "Hey, I have a feeling that your sister is stealing my cosmetics," I told my husband one evening. "Seriously? She'd never do something like that," he replied dismissively. "And anyway, she's your sister too now, so you should try to get along with her. Honestly, she's already said you're hard to deal with, especially since you don't even contribute as much as I do." His words left me stunned, and all I could do was lower my head in silence. My husband's comments, which used to be nothing but complaints about me, turned into condescending remarks. I realized that there was no one on my side. Why did I have to endure all of this? Every day I cried myself to sleep. Why didn't I get a divorce despite everything? Some might wonder, but it's not that I didn't want to get a divorce. I couldn't get a divorce. When I thought about my parents, who were so overjoyed at my marriage, the idea of getting a divorce less than a year into my marriage was something I couldn't bear. "You have a family now. I'm relieved," my mother had said, smiling through tears. Whenever something painful happened, I would remember her face, and those words echoed in my mind. I felt like divorcing would be betraying my mother, and I simply couldn't do it. One evening during an ordinary dinner, my sister-in-law suddenly addressed everyone at the table with a serious expression. "Can I say something?" she began, her tone commanding attention. "I'm getting married," she announced plainly. "Really? You're getting married? That's wonderful," I exclaimed, genuinely surprised but happy for her. "Congratulations!" My husband and in-laws chimed in, their faces lighting up with excitement. I joined in with my own heartfelt congratulations. But instead of acknowledging me, she dismissed it with a cold remark. "I wasn't really telling you specifically." Her indifference didn't bother me in the slightest. Honestly, I was far more thrilled by the thought that one less troublesome person would soon be out of this house. From there, the conversation naturally shifted to the details of her upcoming wedding, and the atmosphere quickly turned lively as everyone eagerly joined in the discussion. The wedding went well, and after the registration, my sister-in-law would be living with her husband's family. Since my sister-in-law was no longer in the house, my in-laws appeared lonely. However, thanks to her absence, the bullying and mistreatment toward me had weakened, and I felt considerably relieved. I was careful not to let anyone notice my true feelings, as I didn't want them to sense my relief. Nevertheless, gradually, I started to regain some mental space, and a desire to break free from this situation began to emerge. How could I escape from this house without causing sadness to my parents? I pondered this question. While contemplating, I recalled something peculiar: the unusually late time my husband would return home. I had been so preoccupied with fussing over the daily chores I was commanded to do that I hadn't paid much attention. But upon closer consideration, I realized it was indeed strange. He hadn't been the type of person to have such consistent overtime before we got married. Yet recently he would arrive home just before the date changed. I vaguely remembered hearing about it once before. "Are you that busy with work?" I asked him cautiously. "Huh? It's none of your business, just shut up," he replied coldly, without even glancing away from his smartphone. I didn't probe further. Even if my husband came home late, I considered a blessing, or so I thought. I decided to investigate the reason behind his late return. On my day off from work, I informed my mother-in-law that I would go grocery shopping for dinner, but instead, I went straight to the bank to withdraw my savings and headed to a detective agency to seek their assistance. Soon enough, I was informed of the results of the investigation into my husband. The photos showed my husband with an unknown woman, proving his affair. According to the detective, my husband's mistress was a colleague at his workplace who, like him, was also married. Their relationship seemed to have started before I married him. I was played a recorded conversation from a bar they frequented. I married my wife just to have her take care of my parents as a servant. She's serving her purpose adequately, my husband's voice echoed through the recording. Really? But you married her despite everything, right? The woman asked. Are you jealous? You are the only one I love, he reassured her. I was filled with an overwhelming desire to crumple the photos that captured my husband and his mistress wearing smiles. Reminding myself that these were pieces of evidence, I managed to calm my emotions somehow. It became evident to me that my husband burdened me with responsibilities while seeking the freedom to spend time with his mistress. With this conviction, I visited the lawyer's office on my next day off and sought their assistance. During that entire week, of course, my in-laws and husband freely released their abusive remarks. Unlike before, I thought, everything will become evidence, so I recorded their verbal abuse each time. After a few days of consulting with a lawyer, an unexpected situation arose. My sister-in-law, who had married and moved into her husband's family home, came back crying. It had been a while since I last saw her, and she seemed a bit worn out, clinging to my clothes and sobbing. While I was tasked with cleaning the room, I listened to the conversation between my sister-in-law and my in-laws. Surprisingly, my sister-in-law had been subjected to blame from her husband's mother. What should I do? She asked, her voice trembling. It's impossible to expect you to be perfect at housework. Why are you complaining? Your husband understands, my father-in-law said dismissively. Exactly. Instead of complaining, you should be grateful that he even helps out, my mother-in-law added. They tried to console their daughter. It's despicable not to protect your wife. Sister, you should consider leaving such a man, my husband chimed in with an air of self-righteousness. Hearing those words, I couldn't help but think, wait, you're saying that? You're no different. And it slipped out of my mind. My father-in-law reassured her, you're doing more than enough. Just because you are a daughter-in-law doesn't mean you have to do everything. Exactly. Ideally, everyone should share the responsibilities, my mother-in-law agreed. I didn't have to do everything. Share the responsibilities? That's easy for them to say. There was a snapping sound within me, like something had just snapped. Hold on, sis. You have it better than me, right? Actually, it's your own fault, isn't it? After all the bullying you've put me through, now it's coming back to haunt you, I said, unable to suppress my feelings any longer. In an instant, my in-laws turned red with anger. Don't dare joke around. Who do you think you are, Hector's wife? My father-in-law snapped. Don't you have any empathy? My husband added. You're not even human, my mother-in-law shouted, hurling insults one after another. Despite that, my sister-in-law tried to portray herself as a tragic heroine. How awful! You don't even understand my feelings. Just stay quiet, she exclaimed. Oh, really? I understand your feelings just fine. I've been bullied by all of you for so long, I retorted. The old me wouldn't have dared to respond like this, but at the moment I couldn't stop myself. Seriously, haven't you realized? The things you've done to me all this time are the same as what your husband's family is doing to you. Yet, you all just spout empty platitudes. Aren't you ashamed? I continued firmly. My mother-in-law screamed hysterically. Well, what are you saying? You're a failure, so we need to keep you under control. Following suit, my husband stood up and declared, I never thought you were such a person. I've had enough. I want a divorce. Upon hearing that, my in-laws smirked and lauded. They must have thought I would be taken aback by the mention of divorce. Of course, divorce is fine by me, but in return, I will make sure to claim my fair share of the assets. I replied calmly. Huh? Fair share of the assets? My husband repeated, dumbfounded. In front of him, I scattered the photos of evidence of his infidelity that I had received from the detective agency. As he turned pale, my in-laws trembled in disbelief at the realization that their son had done such a thing. I turned to him and said, Hey, You had a relationship even before marrying me, right? And the other person was married too. You were satisfied with burdening me with troublesome parents, weren't you? My in-laws were speechless, shocked to learn their son married me to shirk caring for them. My mother-in-law muttered, "Hector, this can't be true, right?" "It's all a lie, isn't it?" Their own son had been involved in an affair. It must have been a tremendous shock. My mother-in-law's face turned ashen and she lowered her head. "Regarding the divorce, you'll receive further instructions from the lawyer I've hired. Please follow the guidance from now on," I stated firmly, then left my in-laws' house behind me, and from then on, everything went smoothly. The evidence of my husband's infidelity that I received from the detective agency, along with the recordings I had been making of my husband and in-laws' remarks, became proof. I was able to divorce my husband without any issues. Furthermore, this revelation exposed the affair to the husband of the other woman, leading to their divorce as well. Moreover, the other woman's husband demanded compensation from my husband. Both my husband and the other woman had stipulated their savings. In fact, they were in debt. I heard that my husband had to borrow money through cash advances just to pay the compensation. But that wasn't the only punishment for my husband. Since the other woman was a colleague at his workplace, the affair became known in the company, and he was looked down upon by others. As a result, unable to bear the atmosphere at work, my husband decided to resign voluntarily. On the other hand, I quietly returned to my parents' home after divorcing my husband. At first, my parents greeted me with surprised expressions, but when I explained everything, they burst into tears and hugged me. "It's our fault for making you go through such things. We're so sorry. We should have noticed. We're truly sorry," my parents said through tears. I also realized that everything had finally come to an end and felt relieved, tears streaming down my face. From then on, I spent my days together with my parents at home. My workplace was within a reasonable commuting distance from my parents' place, and I successfully submitted a transfer request, which was accepted. When I think back on my married life with my husband, there are days when I regret not taking action earlier. But now, being able to peacefully spend my days with my parents, it's all because of my own effort, and no one else. It's the fruit of my own hard work. From now on, I want to cherish each day and live a life without regrets.